Fam, thanks for talking some college football with me. My name is Kyle Henderson, Bama Football on YouTube. In this particular video, we're going to talk about some playoff predictions. I know there's a lot of football left to play, but this coming Tuesday, you're going to get a look at the college football playoff committees, they're 1 through 12. So right now, when we look to the AP Top 25, one thing that you're going to see is a lot of teams that are undefeated, right? You have BYU, who is undefeated. You have Penn State and Ohio State, who play this weekend. You have Miami. So a lot of teams are undefeated. But when you go a little bit deeper into the detail, you see that these particular four teams will play a lot into the final college football playoff rankings. And, of course, Penn State, Ohio State, those teams aren't listed. I would imagine that Ohio State wins that game. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's talk about Miami real quick. Miami favorites clearly to win the ACC. Now, I wouldn't forget about Clemson. And in fact, you know, when we talk about college football in general, Clemson is one of those teams that certainly has momentum. I think if you really ask me who are two college football teams that absolutely have momentum right now, I would say Georgia and I would say Clemson. Now, Clemson's only loss is to Georgia. Now, do I think Clemson's a college football title contender? No, but I think they have some good momentum and they're flying under the radar. Dabo Swinney's he's done a really good job this season getting those guys to really buy in. Remember, he didn't go to the transfer portal. He got some flack for that, but he's had those guys playing some really good football as of late. Let me ask you, before we move forward, do you think that Clemson would beat Miami if those two teams were to play this weekend? I would imagine that those two teams meet for the ACC championship game. You also have Miami. Let's start with them real quick on the left. They're not going to lose to BYU, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest. I mean, Syracuse, I thought maybe a couple weeks ago that Syracuse could give them a handful, but, man, with Kyle McCord throwing 5 interceptions, maybe it was just that game against Pittsburgh. I'm just not buying Syracuse anymore, probably selling. So let's say Miami finishes out the season undefeated. They'd have to tangle with Clemson should Clemson get to the ACC championship game. So remember, the way that the playoffs work, and I want to come back to this graphic, but the way that the college football playoffs work is 1 through 4, those teams will get buys, and they have to be from the Power 4 conferences, right? Big 12, Big 10, ACC, SEC. Miami is a team that certainly we're going to be watching. They have an ability to win games, especially in the fourth quarter. Cam Ward, I think we can all agree, absolutely balling out, doing a really good job this season for Miami, winning games. And that's what it comes down to, is winning games. They are undefeated. Now, let's look at this graphic again. You have BYU, you have Iowa State. Those two teams are currently undefeated. BYU has Utah. I would imagine they win that. Remember, Cam Rising is not playing in that game. It's a rivalry game, so who knows, but I would imagine BYU wins that. Kansas, Arizona State, and Houston. You can see the schedule for yourself. Iowa State, they have Texas Tech. That could be interesting. They also have Kansas, Cincinnati, Utah, and then they play Kansas State. I would imagine that Kansas State plays. Who knows what that game's going to be like? I would imagine that Kansas State maybe is the slight. Well, the game is in Ames, Iowa, rather. So I would imagine that Iowa State is the favorite in that game. That's going to be must-watch college football during that point in time. And then the great thing is that BYU and Iowa State will play each other theoretically for the Big 12 title game. So you also have another team that's undefeated, and that team is Indiana out of the Big 10, having one of their best seasons in quite some time, right? Their quarterback was a little bit banged up. He should be healthy sooner than later. They have Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State. Clearly, Ohio State's going to be the big favorite on that one, especially with the game being in Columbus, Ohio, right? And then you have Purdue. So some of those teams should lose and will lose, of course. And here's what the college football playoffs are going to look like. Now, I got these teams and the seedings 1 through 12 when I played around with Alabama making the playoffs. Now, currently, Alabama, if you're an Alabama fan watching this, the Crimson Tide has a 53% chance to make the playoffs if they should win out. They have games against, if you're an Alabama football fan, you have games against LSU on the road. You play Mercer, Oklahoma, and Alabama. So when I did that scenario, it actually put Alabama, without making the SEC championship game, as the number 8. So let's just start up top. You have Tennessee, you have Georgia. The teams that are in red text are teams from the SEC. And I think the SEC is going to carry a lot of weight in the playoffs because of the parity that we've seen from that conference. I think we all know it is the super conference. I think that we know that collectively the SEC has a lot more talent than the Big Ten, ACC, and the Big 12. I mean, for example, where would Iowa State or BYU or Miami be in the SEC? Honestly, when you look to the SEC football standings, I mean, you can just tell the gravity of just how good these teams are from top to bottom. For example, right now, Georgia, as I mentioned, they have a ton of momentum, one of the top teams in college football. Kentucky should have beat Georgia head-to-head. Remember, that score was 13-12. You have Texas A&M, who's playing some fantastic football, and that's helping Notre Dame each week because Notre Dame, as they continue to win, they have that head-to-head win over Texas A&M. LSU's 3-1 in conference play. Tennessee 3-1 in conference play. Texas, right? And Texas just played Vanderbilt. That game was down to the wire. So my point is, there's a lot of parity in the SEC. That's why I think I would imagine that a lot of teams in the SEC, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this particular graphic, get into the playoffs. Let me ask you, if you're just a casual college football fan, I mean, do you think this is realistic? 5 teams from the SEC getting in? I kind of think so. I mean, if Bama finishes 10-2, remember they have that win over Georgia, and if Georgia's able to run the table in the SEC, in this particular graphic, it has Texas winning the SEC, but I think Georgia's going to win the SEC. In fact, I'm starting to wonder, and I get it, like Texas has played some really good football, but were we overhyping Texas, right? That's something to debate. I think that right now there's a lot of teams that are beatable, clearly, but I think Georgia clearly has the most momentum, and that's why that win over for Alabama over Georgia is going to carry so much weight. So let's go through this real quick. It has Oregon winning the Big Ten as the number 1 seed. Has number 2 Texas winning the SEC championship game. You know what's fun is if you go to ESPN's playoff predictor, just type in ESPN playoff predictor, you can figure out all these scenarios yourself. Has number 3 BYU winning the Big 12 and then Miami winning the ACC. I don't agree with that. I already explained why, but look at some of these matchups, right? You'd have Tennessee going to Athens to take on Georgia in the SEC first-round game. You'd have Bama hosting Boise. I would love to see that. That game would be scary for Alabama fans. Boise running the football the way that they do. I would love to see that game. You have A&M on the road to take on Penn State. Would love to see that matchup in Happy Valley. And then Notre Dame hosting Indiana, and I guess a battle for Indiana. So that's kind of how the playoffs could look. Now, a lot on the line this weekend when you look to this particular game. Ohio State taking on Penn State. Now, the game is at Penn State. The quarterback looks to be questionable. ESPN matchup predictor has Ohio State as a 61% favorite. I'm going to take Ohio State all the way in this game. I think we've seen a pattern of James Franklin. He has an inability to win big games. And while you could say the same thing about Ryan Day, I think Ohio State goes into Happy Valley and comes out with the W. Anyways, just wanted to talk some college football playoff outcomes, some scenarios, but Alabama still definitely in it. There's so much football left to play, and it's great to see. It's fun to play around with the 12-team bracket. Let me know. You know what? How about you post your top 12 or just top 4 inside the comment box? Which 4 teams? How about this? This will be easier. Post your conference champions inside the comment box. SEC champ, ACC, Big 10, and Big 12. Sound off inside the comment box on your conference championship, on your conference champion winner. I appreciate you guys being here. Please hit the thumbs up on these videos. It goes a long way. I appreciate you guys being here. Kyle Henderson at Bama Football on YouTube.